and welcome to this video. It has been a long time since I've chatted books, and that is because I was without internet for 4 weeks, so almost all of July. But I did get some really good reading in during that time. I read a lot of books. It's been the best reading month I've had so far this year, which is a really good thing. But my reading plans for the month kind of got thrown out the window with the whole not having internet thing, and all of the library holds and books that I was thinking I was going to read, I ended up not being able to because, long story short, my Kindle did not work well with my hotspot on my phone, and so I had to kind of read what was on my Kindle, which was a good chance to kind of read some of those books that have been sitting there for a really long time. But yeah, anyways, I read a lot of books this month. I read, I think, 10, and I had a couple of 5-star reads, which was really exciting because it's been a long time since I had a 5-star read. So it was a fabulous reading month, and without further ado, let's just get into the books. I have my trusty little notebook. I took some notes this time to help me remember what I read, because I'm really bad at remembering all of the books I read, and sometimes the details and my thoughts about them, so hopefully that will help for this month. First up, I read Mrs. Quinn's Rise to Fame by Olivia Ford. I talked about this in my reading vlog, which I'll link below if you want to hear more about my thoughts in that video. But I really enjoyed this. It was a lot of fun. We follow our main character, Mrs. Quinn, and she has entered this Great British Baking Show type contest, and she's older. I believe she's in her 70s or her late 60s. I don't remember exactly. But anyway, she's all about kind of her journey through the competition. There's also some of her backstory. It's definitely not always a light and fluffy book. There's some hard aspects of her past that she's kind of wrestling with and trying to figure out, but it is a really sweet book, and I just absolutely adored her marriage with her husband and the way that's portrayed in the book. It was so sweet and so beautiful, and I wish that more contemporary books had that kind of portrayal of marriage because it was so nice to read. Next book I picked up was The Islands of Elsewhere by Heather Fawcett. This is a middle grade book, and I had previously read her adult fiction, Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, which was super popular when it came out, and I was kind of disappointed with it. I loved the concept of it, but the book just didn't quite live up to it for me. But I thought I would try some of her middle grade, and I'm really glad I did because I really enjoyed this one. We follow 3 siblings who, with their mom and their little baby brother, go and live with their grandfather for the summer. He has some kind of early Alzheimer's, dementia stuff going on, and so he needs people to kind of be with him to help him out. And there's some kind of magic going on. There's this legend of some buried treasure, and this was a lot of fun. This was very summery and a lot of fun, but with some kind of magical vibes to it as well, which I really enjoyed. And I know she's written more middle grade, so I definitely want to read those books because I enjoyed Heather Fawcett's middle grade. Alright, next up I read Heidi by Johanna Spyri. I don't know if that's how you pronounce her name, but I read this and I absolutely adored it. This was so much fun and quickly catapulted itself into my favorite books of all time. We follow Heidi at the beginning of this book, and she has been brought to live with her grandfather in this remote part of the Alps. And her life with her grandfather is not very typical. She gets to kind of just roam free and run around the mountains, and she doesn't go to school. Kind of upsets some of the village people. But then her aunt, who brought her originally to live with her grandfather, comes back and says that she has this amazing opportunity for Heidi, that Heidi can be a companion to this girl who has an illness and she is confined to a wheelchair. And so Heidi goes to the city, to Frankfurt to live with this girl and be her companion. And we just follow Heidi kind of throughout all of her adventures, and this was so much fun to read. I especially liked the little girl, her friend's grandmama, her character. She had so much wisdom and just such good insights about life and God and prayer and forgiving people. And so I really enjoyed that. It's just such a sweet story, such a beautiful friendship between Heidi and her friend. And yeah, I just really, really enjoyed this. It made me want to go to the Alps. Next up, another Kindle read, and this was a sort of Jane Austen July type book, and that is A Game of Hearts by Joanna Barker. This is a Regency era romance where our main characters are rival archers. It's told between alternating points of view from the two main characters, Tristan and Marigold, and they have been sort of enemies their entire life. Their families are friends, but they have basically hated each other always, and are now kind of the two best archers in their town, and so they're competing against each other. And kind of at the background of all of this, Marigold is kind of the only female archer in her town, and she wants to join this exclusive men's archery society, but the head person of that won't let her in because she's a woman. And so she has kind of set a bet against him that if her group of women that she is going to assemble can beat the men, then that he has to let her join the society. So kind of there's this tension with her archery goals, and then also this romance that unfolds. The first part of it for me was a little slow because there's a lot about archery and the competitions going on, but once the romance part of it started, I really enjoyed this. It is probably one of the best enemies to lovers romance books that I've ever read. Like, you really got to see them progress from being enemies to starting to develop a friendship to starting to like each other, and you kind of get to see the whole spectrum of things. And sometimes I feel like books just skip from like we hate each other to we love each other, and you don't really understand why we got to that point. But this one was so good. There were so many good scenes in it, and I loved it so much. I definitely want to read more of Joanna Barker's work because this was so much fun. Next up, another middle grade, and that is Family Sabbatical by Carol Ryrie Brink. This takes place mostly in the south of France, but then a little bit in Paris as well. And this family has moved to France. The father is a professor, and so he is going on sabbatical in France to do research. I think he's maybe a history professor, I don't know. But he took his family along with them, and we kind of follow them through the seasons, starting in summer and going all the way through Christmas time. So it's a semester basically that they spent abroad. And this was so much fun. I loved getting to kind of see the different struggles that they went through living in France. I live in France, and I loved all the kind of like culture shocks and the different ways they learned to celebrate different holidays. And so I could definitely relate to a lot of that, and not being able to maybe celebrate holidays the way you're used to at home, and having to kind of find ways to make new traditions and adapt to this new country that you're living in. The siblings were so sweet. I loved their relationships with each other, and especially the youngest daughter. She was so sweet and so wise, and yeah, this was a lot of fun. I know it's technically the second book in the series, the first one being Family Grandstand, but you can totally read this one first. Like, I didn't have any trouble like picking things up and figuring out kind of their background, but I will want to probably go back and read Family Grandstand this fall maybe, because it was so much fun following this family. All right, next up I read Drake Hall by Christina Baer, I think that's right. And this is the second book in the Secrets of Ormdale series. I think maybe we're up to 5 books now, I don't know. This is cozy Victorian fantasy with dragons. I am not a huge fantasy reader, but I absolutely adore this series because it's so historically based, and the fantasy kind of dragon elements of it fit in so nicely, and it doesn't feel like a very distant fantastical world, if that makes sense. But anyways, this book was a lot of kind of setup for what I think will happen in book 3. And so it felt kind of slow, and I was kind of hoping for there to be like a little bit more action at the end, which there wasn't. But it was still really good. I definitely enjoy the world and following these characters, and I'm looking forward to book 3. Hopefully there's going to be, I think, a little bit more going on in that book. Next up, another Jane Austen July book, and this is the only Jane Austen work that I read this month, but Persuasion. This was my first time reading Persuasion, and I adored it. It was so good. It might be my favorite Jane Austen. I don't know. I still have Northanger Abbey and Mansfield Park to read, but from what I've read so far, I think this was so good. This is a second chance romance. We follow Anne Elliot, who rejected Captain Wentworth like many years ago. 8 years, I think, maybe more. 8 years ago. She rejected him basically at the advice of her dear family friend. But all of this time has passed and she hasn't found someone better to marry. And Captain Wentworth comes back into her life, and it's them trying to figure out, do they still have feelings for each other? They try to rekindle what they had 8 years ago. This is so much fun. I love Anne Elliot. She is such a sweet character, even though her family is kind of a hot mess. Like, they are kind of a disaster. She has her sister who's married, who's an absolute mess, and her other sister and her father, who she lives with, are also kind of a lot and just kind of chasing wealth and status. But Anne is so grounded, and she is such a good character. I absolutely adored this. I forgot how much I love Jane Austen. I feel like every time I read one of her books, I am like so amazed, and I'm like, I absolutely adore Jane Austen, and I need to prioritize getting to Northanger Abbey and Mansfield Park by the end of this year, hopefully, because I want to say that I've read all of her books, and I love them so much when I'm reading them. I don't know why I don't reach for it more often, because it's just so good. Next up is my backlog Kindle book that has been sitting on my Kindle for, I don't know, maybe years at this point. And that is the first book in the Father Brown mystery series by G.K. Chesterton, and it is The Innocence of Father Brown. I didn't really know what to expect going into this. I thought it was like a series of novels, but they're actually a series of short stories. So Father Brown is this kind of unassuming, short little priest who everyone just looks over, but he has this really profound understanding of human nature and of sin and what drives people to make either good or poor decisions. And so it's really interesting in that way. He has a very theological approach to solving crime, and I definitely enjoyed that because it's something different than other mystery books that I've read. So I'm looking forward to reading the other books in that series. I think there's a total of 5, I believe. And then finally, the last book I read this month, and this was a reread, and that is The Wreath by Sigrid Undset. This is the first book in the Kristin Lavransdatter trilogy, and this is set in Norway during the 12th century? No, 14th century. Close. And we follow Kristin, who is a young girl at the start of the book, and she is growing up in this very religious family, Catholic family, and it's a lot about her choices and coming of age, and there's some romance, and oh, poor Kristin. She does not make great choices in this book. She makes a lot of really poor choices, but it's handled in such an interesting way that you really come to understand, again, like Father Brown, sin and the kinds of choices we make and the effects that it has on other people. That's something that I thought was so interesting that I picked up on this reread, because I read it a year ago only. And there was a line in this book basically where Kristen is talking to this friend who is a monk, and she is explaining to him that she has finally come to realize that one of the consequences of sin is that you end up trampling over other people, which is so true. And she is kind of naive at first. She thinks that her choices are kind of hers to make, and she fails to really see the long-term consequences and effects and the rippling that comes from every choice we make. And so that's something that I think is so interesting in this book, is that it really explores this idea that the choices we make are not just ours, they affect others as well. So I am really eager to read the second book, because it definitely ends where you're feeling a little bit nervous for Kristen. She has made some choices and she is kind of starting to live the effects of these choices. Kind of leave that's a little vague. But yeah, I am eager to see how the rest of her story unfolds. Book 2 is called The Wife, and then book 3 is The Cross. So I plan on reading this probably sometime this fall with a friend. And yeah, beautiful, beautiful story. Definitely recommend. That is it for my books that I've read this month. It was a really good reading month, like I said, and I am looking forward to August, to finishing up kind of some summery reads and then getting to look towards fall and getting excited for that as well. So let me know below what you've been reading, and I will see you next time. Bye!